ADA 30 Idaho, celebrating the Americans with Disabilities Act.
I will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Virtual Book People of Moscow. Today, we're celebrating All the Way to the Top as Annette Pimentel's new book, as well as her conversation partner and inspiration, Jennifer Keelan Chaffins, as well as our audience. Thank you all for joining us today, and if you do not already have a copy of the book, I want to remind everyone that copies are available in-store and online with various shipping, delivery, and pickup options. But I have a few housekeeping notes to start. We have Lauren joining us this afternoon as our interpreter, so please feel free to pin her screen for continuous viewing. This can be done by hovering over her image and selecting the ellipses for a dropping pin. The other thing we can do is we have a closed captioning option available today, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. And that's right next to your reactions button, which you can click and have a closed captioning option. Otherwise, just basic housekeeping notes. The upper right-hand corner is where you can adjust your screen view. And audience microphones will largely be muted until our Q&A at the end of the event. But to begin, I want to welcome Kaylina. She's here with us today from the Disability Action Center in Moscow to say a few words before we move into our discussion with Annette and Jennifer. Thank you, everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Kaylina, and as mentioned, I work for the Disability Action Center in the Moscow office. I'm an independent living advocate. The Disability Action Center is a center for independent living, so our focus is to promote independence and equality for all individuals with disabilities in all aspects of society. We love the book All the Way to the Top and the message of using your voice. Two of the big things that we do as a Center for Independent Living is to promote self-advocacy and to promote systems advocacy. So this book encompasses that view and that message so clearly, and the message that no matter who you are, no matter what your age, you have a voice, and that voice is powerful, and we all need to learn to use our voices. And so we just love this book, and I'm so thankful to be a part of this event, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to pass the baton to Annette. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaylina. I really admire and appreciate the Disability Action Center here in Moscow, and I also wanted to shout out to the Northwest Americans with Disabilities Act Center, which is an organization that provides information, training, and guidance on the ADA to people in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And they're providing our closed captioning and our sign language interpretation, which I really appreciate. So I wanted to talk about how I came into this book and about how Jennifer and I met. So I write books about moments of American history where I think of them as inflection points, points where there's a big change that's usually surprisingly often fueled by the actions of a single person. And I was trying to think of a new topic for a book, and so I was thinking about things that have happened in my life that I think are really major moments in changing and shaping American culture. And I thought of the Americans with Disabilities Act. My other books are about things that happened either before I was born or when I was very small, but I was an adult when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And I watched it transform the world around me. You know, when I went to school, I did not go to school with any kids with disabilities because they were not allowed in my school. And yet my children went to school with other children with disabilities. I watched the sidewalks in my neighborhood get torn out at the corners to make curb cuts. And I realized that children probably would not realize those changes that had occurred. So I decided, well, I want to write a book about the ADA, but it's a little tricky to write about a law because that can be just a little bit boring. So I started researching the legislative history of it. And I want to share my screen and show you a very short video. It's about, it's part of a video, and it's about 1 minute long about what I found while I was researching. So.
I get out of my wheelchair and I start climbing. National news, I had everybody. They say that it was the image of me was the final decision to get the ADA passed.
So as I was searching about the history of the ADA, I discovered that there was this huge march that happened in Washington, D.C. And it was remarkable because it was the first time that multiple disability groups came together in a single action. There had been some actions that people who were hearing impaired had taken, some that people who were mobility impaired had taken, but this was really the first major event where many disability groups came together in a common cause for one thing, and it was the Americans with Disabilities Act. And they marched down Pennsylvania Avenue, and when they got to the Capitol, then as you just saw there, then there was a pre-planned action, and people in wheelchairs climbed out of their wheelchairs and climbed up the steps of the Capitol. It was a really graphic depiction of what it means to have a barrier to access, you know, showing that these people couldn't, that was the only way they could get into the building where laws were made. And Jennifer Keelan, who was an 8-year-old girl, was one of those who climbed up the steps. And as soon as I saw that, I was so excited because I thought, okay, here is someone who, well, all of these thousands of people with disabilities were advocating for themselves, but this was a child who was doing it. And I realized the book could be not only about the Americans with Disability Act, but more broadly about how children can take action and make a difference. But the problem was that, you know, I am not currently someone with disabilities, so I didn't feel like it was necessarily my story to tell. And so I realized right from the beginning that the only way that I could do it is if Jennifer were interested in doing it with me. But I didn't know Jennifer. So I tried to find her online, and I tried all sorts of different ways. And finally, I set my husband, who is a good internet sleuth, and I said, can you find me contact information for Jennifer? And he came back to me a few hours later and said, well, here's an email, but I don't know if it is like one that works. And so I sent this email out into the ether. And luckily it was a working email and it did reach Jennifer. And so I want to ask Jennifer, can you tell us about like what it was like when you got this email from this complete stranger with this wacky idea?
Well, I thought that your idea was fantastic, and I was so pleased that you reached out, because what I loved about your email was you wanted to tell my story from my 8-year-old perspective, and I thought that was great. And the other thing that was really neat about it was this was the first time that somebody had reached out to me wanting to know my story from my 8-year-old perspective. Nobody else had ever asked me before. So I was really, really intrigued and really excited to start this project with you. So yeah, that was really cool.
And Jennifer was very generous with her time, and she did not mention it, but at the time that I reached out to her, she was still a college student. She's since graduated. But so she started this project in the middle of her own studies. And she and I spent a lot of time on the telephone, and she sent me material, like images of materials that she and her family had saved. And she also answered many, many questions via email. I don't even know how long our email track is together. But Jennifer, I'd like to just ask you a few questions about like what it was like working together. So I'm wondering, what was the hardest part for you about trying to share your memories about that time?
Well, I think that for me, it was actually a very pleasant experience because it allowed me to share those memories and allowed me to go back into those moments when I was 8 years old, doing those protests and fighting to get the ADA passed. So it wasn't really a hard experience. It was a pleasant experience.
One of the things that was great as a writer is that when I have written in the past about people who have passed away, then I have lots of questions and there's no way to get answers for them. You know, there are certain things that you can find from the historical record, but it was such a privilege for me to think up a question and just think, well, I can send Jennifer an email, you know, and ask her about that. And one of the things that was interesting for me is that you are an adult, but we were talking about when you were a child, and I would ask these really specific questions, and some of them you had really vivid sensory memories of, and some, like, you know, you were a kid, and so like you didn't have an answer, and we really relied a lot on your mom's memories too. She
Yes.
kind of became the third part of that because she had a better context for understanding what had been going on than Jennifer did. So it was really great to have both of your perspectives in there. I feel like as we talked that I learned a ton about, I did my research as well, but I feel like from working with you, I learned a ton. I feel like you educated me a lot about disabilities and about what it really means to be inclusive. And I'm wondering if that was like, felt like just what you do all the time, or if that was like something that you had to consciously work on as we were working together.
I don't think it was something that I consciously had to work on, but what I felt was really fun about it was I was able to bring you in to my experience, and we felt those things together, and that helped you really get into that moment. And so that's what I think was the most important thing for both of us was the ability for me to bring us both back into that moment at that place and time.
Yeah, and it did feel like we really did, as we were digging into like your specific memories, it did feel like we were able to like get there to the sounds and the sights and what you felt and everything in that moment. Yeah. One of the really important moments to me as we've been working together, Jennifer and I have done school visits together, and I had done like a rough draft of our school visit, and I wanted to explain to kids what accessibility is, and so I had different images of things that are accessible and things that aren't accessible, and Jennifer and I were going through getting ready for the visit, and she made such a great comment about that, about what I had set up, and she said, well, you know, you've left out the reason for the accessibility. You know, you show like an elevator panel that just has numbers and one with Braille on it. And she said, but that's not really what accessibility is about. It's not about the physical things. It's about how the physical things help people connect to other people. And so we were able to change our school visit to, so instead of just showing the Braille panel and on the elevator, we talked about how it would feel if you got invited to a party that was at an upper floor of a building and you couldn't see to know which button to push. And I thought that that kind of encapsulated everything that this book is about, that that's what the ADA is about, that yeah, it specifies that we need to make physical changes, but the really important thing is the reason behind it. And so I feel like you really taught me that, which I really appreciate. So I have a few pictures of you as a child activist, and I am going to share my screen and just let you talk a little bit about some of your memories there. So let me call that up. Can you see that screen okay?
Yes.
Okay.
This is my photo of my participation in the Capitol Crawl. And I really love Annette's description of that day because she is right. During the Capitol Crawl, the Senate had already passed their version of the ADA, but Congress was still delaying the passage. And so what was really cool about this event is it brought all of the disability groups together, all of the disability rights groups together to speak with one voice, to show Congress and tell Congress why it was important to pass the ADA without further delay. And so what's really cool about this photo is not only can you see me in this photo, but you can also see all the people down below cheering us on and getting all of us together. And what this photo demonstrates for me is why I participated in the Capitol Crawl. When I was a child, I realized that I was not just representing myself, but I was representing my generation and future generations of kids with disabilities. And so that's why I was so determined to make it to the top, even at such a young age, because I wanted to make sure that all of our voices were represented, not just mine.
Yeah. One thing that I learned from talking with you, Jennifer, is about all the different times in your life when you also were demonstrating, and my screen, I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare because my screen was not advancing. So let me see. And so I just have a few other photos from that day and from other events. So let me just go through those. And if you want to say anything about them, then you are welcome to. Let's see, resume slideshow. There.
This is actually a photograph of my second protest that I participated in San Francisco. And this is where I met many iconic leaders of the movement. I met Justin Dart, and I met Judith Heumann and Bob Kafka.
Who are the other people in line here with you? Yeah.
Yes, Justin is right here. And then I'm right here with my mom. And then next to me is Bob Kafka. And then next to Bob is Diane Coleman. And these were my mentors and my teachers. And Justin Dart Jr. is also known as the father of the ADA. So I felt really privileged to learn from these great adults. And so, yeah, I mean, this brings back so many memories.
Yeah. This is another shot of the same protest, which I love this one because it shows Jennifer shouting.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to talk about this one?
This photo is actually when we were doing a protest in Atlanta. And this is a photo of me and my little sister, Kaylee. And in this photo, we are actually signing in the protest because we were just learning sign language from our friend Mitch.
So Jennifer, one of the scariest things always for me as a writer of picture books is that moment when I get the email with the art for the book. And it always takes me a little while before I'm willing to click on it and see what the art is going to look like. So I'm wondering how it felt to you to get the illustrations for this book.
I was so excited because the illustrations are so beautiful. And they're very vivid. And they kind of pull you into it because even though it's just, just one illustration for one page, it says a lot. And what I really like about Nabi's illustrations is he kind of combined things and to where they look familiar, but they're his own. And I just thought that was so cool. And he actually, he did his illustrations from actual photographs, which made it even more authentic. And so I'm just so pleased with the illustrations.
Yeah, I was really concerned about Nabi as the illustrator before I saw the illustrations because we had really hoped to get an illustrator with disabilities. And but the publisher felt really strongly that Nabi's sensibilities were what they wanted. And after the book came out, as Nabi and I were talking, because there's kind of like a wall between writers and illustrators during the process, but afterward I asked him, so what drew you to the manuscript? And he said, well, he has a degenerative disease, and he expects to be in a wheelchair permanently within a very few years. And so we did actually, and I told him we'd been looking for an illustrator with disabilities, and he said, oh, I don't think my agent even knew that. But I think that, but once I knew that, I understood a lot more about how he managed to get such emotion infused into the art, because I think that this very much is his story. And I wanted to just share a couple of the illustrations from the book. So one is this image that we just saw. Oh, it's not going to let me. Sorry, I have to reshare and use a different window. Okay. So like Jennifer said, Nabi did do the illustrations from photos, but he made them very much his own, also, like she said. So this is one example where you can see how he was inspired by this photo, but then made it his own here. Some of them came pretty directly from the news coverage. This is a picture of the signing of the ADA with Justin Dart, and it's a very iconic photo that was in newspapers and stuff. And so some of them he did kind of replicate, but then others he just made wholly his own. This is a scene where Jennifer was being kept out of the cafeteria in the school. And this one always just really moves me. There are a lot of images in the book of someone with a finger pointing. And this is an example. Sometimes it's a child and sometimes it's an adult, but I thought he really kind of captured that feeling of being excluded in that way. And I particularly loved the way I know that Nabi talked to Jennifer a lot while he was doing the illustrations, and I think he really captures the grit and determination that Jennifer showed in this illustration, which was one that he completely composed. So the picture book is not the only recent celebration of your participation in the Capitol Crawl. And do you want to talk about your experience with the sculptor Gina Clawetter, Jennifer?
Yeah, Gina Clawetter is a local sculpture artist here in Colorado, and she wanted to do a sculpture of me celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA and recognizing the work that the ADA has done and yet still needs to do. And so this is her sculpture, and what I really like about it is a rendering of me redoing the Capitol Crawl, but as an adult. And it shows the accomplishments that the ADA has done over the last 30 years, but it also recognizes the work that the ADA still needs to do. And so, and it's currently being exhibited in the Colorado History Center as part of the This Is What Democracy Looks Like traveling exhibit.
Yeah. So Jennifer, what are your hopes for the book?
Well, one of the things that I am really hoping that the book will do, and I think it's doing a wonderful job, is when I talked to Source about some of the goals that I wanted for the book, was I wanted it to be a teaching tool for young children to teach them the importance of the disability rights movement, the ADA, and the Capitol Crawl. And I think it's done a brilliant job of that. I think it's opened the door to that conversation, and it's a wonderful tool to teach the next generation how important disability rights is in our history.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's been really fun to share the book with kids in schools. So what projects are you working on these days?
Well, right now, I'm working very closely with Gina to make sure that the exhibit for her sculpture is doing well. And also, I'm working closely with schools across the country, making sure that that this book be recognized as part of school curriculum. I know that it is currently being used in the Fairfax public school system. The junior high schools for Fairfax County are using aspects of the book as part of their social studies history curriculum for their schools right now. So I'm very, very happy.
Yeah. Well, I am very grateful that you were willing to take a risk with a stranger to work on this book. And I feel like my life has been really personally enriched from learning from you and working with you. And so I'm really grateful for that. And Jennifer and I would love to answer questions if people have questions for her or for me or for both of us. And we're few in number here, so if you want to just turn on your microphone, I think that would probably be fine.
How long did the process take of working on this book project together?
Yeah, I went and looked through I went to my earliest email to Jennifer to see how early it was, and it was 2017. And so we worked on it for about, what was it, Jennifer, 15 months, I think, before we had a publisher. So she and I had pretty much done the text, and Jennifer wrote the foreword for the book, but that all happened, she did that later. So for her, it was a very long and stretched out process because she helped me, and then she wrote the foreword, and then we got an illustrator, and then he had as many questions for her as I had. So she's been doing it for 3 years pretty constantly.
Yeah,
so
3 years, that's my timeline. So
yeah.
I've noticed at the bookstore more and more books that are about disability activism and disability activists and people with disabilities being visible. And I'm not sure if I'm just noticing them because I'm aware now because of this book, or if it really is happening that there are more things being published. And I'm just curious about Annette and Jennifer, your views on how things are progressing in that realm.
So like the issue of representation in media. Yeah, and Kaylina and Jennifer probably have insights into this. One of the steps in deciding if there's a manuscript topic that I want to do is doing a literature review and seeing if I'm writing something that's already been written. And so when I did the literature review before I reached out to Jennifer, I was really frankly pretty shocked at how little representation there was. There are some really great middle grade novels that pretty recently have started dealing with issues of disability. And they were probably already in the hopper at the time I did the literature review, but there weren't many out. And in terms of picture books, there has been very, very little. But Jennifer, I don't know if you have more to add, or Kaylina may have insight in that as well.
I think that, this is one of the issues that the disability community as a whole is bringing to light, the fact that there is so very few positive representation of media about disability, in the public realm. I think that, more and more, I am seeing more and more about it come about, but I think that as far as a whole, Annette, you are right. There's very little out there, and that's part of the reason why I felt so strongly about getting this book out there, because disability rights and the history of the Capitol Crawl and the movement, that is part of our history, and that is what needs to be told and be represented in a accurate, positive manner.
Yeah. BBC America, incidentally, is doing free streaming this month of there are shows for adults, not for children, but shows that that are acted in, or some of them are fiction, but some of them aren't, but that are about people with disabilities, and they're really great. So if you are interested in dipping your toe, I strongly suggest that you go and check out BBC America this month.
Annette, this is Alice Wershing. I emailed you a while ago about my projects that I've been working on for a number of years, and I echo what Jennifer said, because I did a project about 10 or so years ago at a assistive technology resource center where I was working, and we called it Learning About Freedom. It was a writing and arts grant that we had from our local community here in Knoxville. And we were privileged to bring in Guy and Candy Carawan, who are local. Guy has since passed away, but they were the people that took We Shall Overcome around the country during the civil rights movement. So we started with giving our students who often don't get involved in academic curriculum information about the civil rights movement. We also had people from our local community do talks who had disabilities themselves. But in looking for the books about the ADA, having lived in Berkeley, California at one point in my life for 10 years, there was nothing. I've gotten a few books about Ed Roberts, of course, but by and large, and I think I had reached out to you just as I was working on an idea about the Capitol Crawl, and I'm trying to get my thoughts together about several different kinds of books. So Jennifer or Annette, both of you, and whoever's working at the bookstore in your area, what are you envisioning that would be the next best books to be out there for kids? I work full time. I'm doing a bunch of paid workshops through Storyteller Academy, but it's kind of hard to get the writing done. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Lots of ideas, lots of research, lots of things that I would like to do, but this history is not even known. I've been in the disability field since 1973. I'm old. And as an educator, and I'm also a sibling to a late diagnosed adult with autism spectrum disorders. And so it's really important to me as an educator that not only people know about this movement that's not known, people in my discipline don't know about it. People that are coming up through the ranks of being teachers of students with disabilities, whether they're general ed or special educators, they don't know it either. I highly recommend Crip Camp if you haven't seen it.
I have.
It's great.
It's really good.
I've got to
Yeah,
watch it
it's
again because
fantastic.
I watched it with pen and pencil, and also Rising Phoenix on the history of the Paralympics. There's another idea for a book. There are books out there that people are writing about themselves, but they're for adults. They're not for kids. And I'm with you, Jennifer, getting this into the schools. We had a curriculum ready to go, and then I changed jobs, and funding is an issue and time is an issue, but it's an idea that won't let me go. So.
Well, and I completely understand where you're coming from, and this is the reason why it was so important to me to have it be used as a teaching tool, and why I told Source, we need to have a teacher's guide along with this book to help teach, young kids the concepts that go along with it, the historical aspect of it, and to help kids with the understanding of those concepts. And that's why I specifically said, what can we do to make sure that this is a academic teaching tool? And they and Annette said, well, why don't we create a teacher's guide for grades 1 through 5? And so there is a recognized teacher's guide that goes along with this.
Oh, great.
For grades 1 through 5.
Yeah.
And where is that available from? Is it available for purchase?
It's free.
You can get it either on Source's website, or you can also get it on my website.
Or on mine.
Okay.
It's all over the place. But Alice, I am so glad you joined us, and especially
I was so excited when this came across my feed. It was like, okay, you see, it won't let me go.
Yeah.
It just won't. And I'm working full-time, multiple jobs with a kid in college, and lockdown, teaching classes and working with my students on Zoom. And I do feel very passionate about getting this information out. People don't know Justin Dark.
Yeah.
They don't know Ed Roberts. They may know a little bit about the ADA, but nobody knows about this movement.
Yeah, and I think the biggest tragedy, well, the biggest tragedy would be if there were no books, but the second biggest tragedy would be if our book were the only book that there were. And so I hope that this is the bellwether of greater representation. In picture book, I mean, I think that, as I mentioned to you in the email, that I think there's room for more picture books about Capitol Crawl, and definitely more picture books about the disability rights movement. Personally, although I don't write middle grade nonfiction, I think this would be a fantastic topic for a middle grade nonfiction book that goes into more depths. But unfortunately, I am not a publisher, so what I say is just what I think I would like to read. So, but thank you for the question, and I look forward to your book someday.
I have a question for Jennifer. So the scene in the book that really tugged at my heart, I have it here, was when it says, even when her neighborhood school finally agrees she can attend, she and her classmates with disabilities aren't allowed to eat in the cafeteria with everyone else. That hurts, but she keeps going. That just really got me, because the fact that you couldn't share food with your friends. Could you elaborate more on, did that ever change through your growing up years, or was this something that continued?
Well, when Annette and I were discussing that memory, my sister and I ended up having to eat separated, because I was not allowed to eat with the rest of the kids. I had to eat in a different place. And so what my sister and I did was we went to the principal, and we we told him, that this is wrong. This is actually discrimination. And my little sister said, my sister should be able to eat with everybody else. And so she actually wrote a letter to the principal explaining how the principal could fix it. And by the end of that, I did end up being able to eat with the rest of my classmates. But it took that in order for that to get there. Because when I was little, and my sister, we experienced a lot of discrimination. We experienced a lot of things in which we were separated from each other, because they would tell my mom that Kaylee had to go to one school and I would have to go to another. And my mom was like, no, I want my girls to be in the same school and go to school together and be on the same bus together. And that's what sparked my desire to protest, and our desire to join the movement. Was we were like, oh, wait a minute, because when I first met ADAPT, it was the first time that I'd ever seen other people with disabilities just like myself fighting for their rights. And so both my sister and I were like, oh, wait a minute. This means that we don't have to be separated from each other. This means that we can ride the same bus together, go to the same school together. And, this is also where Kaylee and I were taught about Brown versus the Board of Education and the 504 Rehab Act and IDEA. I mean, this is where we got all of our education. And we were like, okay, sign me up. I want to fight for my rights too, So yeah.
Can I add one thing, Jennifer? And correct me if I'm wrong, but as we were talking, Jennifer and Kaylee actually organized the students in their school, and they did a protest in the cafeteria. It was unsuccessful, and they got suspended from school for organizing it. But I was so impressed I always want to tell the kids about it, and I think Jennifer is concerned about being a bad example. But it was a really, they led a sit-in in the cafeteria in their elementary school.
Yep.
So, but thank you so much all for joining us. We appreciate the chance to get to share our story.
So much. We really appreciate the book, and I appreciate having met Jennifer today and being inspired by your story. And I was just going to say something from a bookseller perspective, is that what we are looking for, as well as the stories about the activists and the movement, is also just the stories where the characters are disabled and it's not an issue in the story, it's just part of normal life. And that's
Yes.
what really, that's another aspect of it that we hope will improve soon.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna just thank you all again for coming, and appreciate being allowed to record this and put it on Facebook. And I know that a lot of people will hear about the book that haven't otherwise before today, and you can get it at the bookstore, Book People of Moscow, in Moscow, Idaho. Annette will be at the store tomorrow at 1 o'clock to sign the book, and also she will sign copies that are ordered through our website at bookpeopleofmoscow.com, so we can always have Annette stop down at the store and sign copies that get mailed out or delivered. So thank you all again. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And if you guys would like more information about my website, you can find my website at jkclegacy.com.
And I'll type that in the chat in case anybody wants that. jkclegacy.com.
Did I get it right? Okay.
Oh yeah, we did it together.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, ladies.
Thanks
It's
for coming.
wonderful.
Bye.
A word collage in the shape of the United States with the word access highlighted and hashtag thanks to the ADA.